We have a serious case to talk about today. This happened in the UK. It was in the 80s, but it was not solved until 2020. So for over 30 years, 3 decades, this monster went undetected. This is the most foul case I think we may have ever spoken about. I don't even know the correct warnings to give for this one. There's a ton of talk about abuse. There is violence, gruesome, disgusting, disturbing details. So if you don't like listening to things that are extremely disturbing, please scroll. Like I said, this is in 1980s in a town called Tunbridge Wells in Kent, England. Wendy Knell, a 25-year-old girl, was moving on fresh from a breakup. She had just moved into an apartment by herself. She was the manager of a film store and she worked closing shifts a lot. June 22nd, she was working a closing shift. The guy that she was seeing walked her home from work. She went to bed, but the next morning she did not show up for work and nobody could get a hold of her. The guy she's seeing starts getting concerned. He walks over to her apartment to see what's going on. He doesn't see any signs of anything bad yet, but the door is locked. So he walks around and sees that a window is open. He essentially just climbs into her apartment through that window and finds the most horrific scene. Wendy was laying in bed, but you could tell she was no longer alive. Her face had been so badly beaten, it was assumed that there was a blunt weapon involved. She had bruises and blood all over her face as well as hand marks around her neck, so she was strangled. The police show up and start investigating, but there's no signs of anything pretty much. There's no signs of someone trying to break in besides the open window, no signs of a struggle. It just seemed like someone walked in through her window, committed murder, walked out and left. The only things they were able to find was one whole fingerprint and a partial shoe print. The autopsy later revealed that there was male DNA inside of her, so she had been sexually abused, and they were able to tell that that had happened after she was already deceased. Unfortunately, because it was the 80s, they didn't have the means to test the DNA yet, so eventually the case just went cold. 5 months after Wendy's death, the same thing happens in the same small town. Caroline Pierce lived in the same small town. She was 20 years old and worked as a waitress. One morning, the cops received a call from her coworkers saying that they were concerned because Caroline had not shown up for work. The coworkers weren't reporting her as missing. They were essentially just calling for a wellness check, so the police walked over. As they were trying to break into the front door because she wasn't coming to the door, the neighbors walk out and they say that they heard female screams late last night. As the police get inside, Caroline is not there. December 1987, 40 miles away from Caroline's apartment, they find her body in a field with almost the exact same injuries as Wendy's. So they realize that whoever did this to Caroline must have done the same thing to Wendy. They do find DNA evidence as well on Caroline, and they test it to the one they found on Wendy's, and it is a match. Caroline's autopsy also later revealed that she had been used after she was already dead. Today, if there's a crime scene like that, police can just take the DNA evidence, test it with the big DNA database that they have and see if there's a match. But in the 80s, they didn't have that yet. So the only thing that they could do pretty much with this DNA is beg the public. This was all over the news. Their tactic was to put it out to the public so intensely to scare the murderer and hope that they wouldn't do it again. So for 30 years, they had no answers, and those two crimes were later referred to as the bedsit murders. Fast forward to the beginning of 2020, there is a new generation of policemen and obviously a lot more technology. So those policemen start reading through cold case files and they realize that they have the database now and they have the DNA, so they test it. In this database that the police have, it is essentially a bunch of DNA from a bunch of different people, but people that have previously committed crimes. So someone that did something bad that caused the cops to take their DNA in the first place. So they test it, they have no match. So they're like, what should we do now? Let's try and go up his family tree. Eventually, they narrowed it down to around 100 people that had similar DNA, and they brought them in for questioning. They ended up finding one person that had a very, very similar DNA. They start asking him if he has any relatives, and he says that he has one brother in his 60s that lives in Tunbridge Wells. So the location matches up and the age matches up because the police were assuming that whoever did that in the 80s was around their 20s. So if the guy was now 60, that would add up. This brother's name is David Fuller. He is 65 years old now. He had never been convicted for any crimes, which is why his DNA was not in the database. However, when he was a teenager, he did break into a few homes but never served any prison time. Breaking into those homes when he was a teenager was the only criminal history that he had, but now as a 65-year-old, he was the most normal man you can think of. He had a wife, he had 3 children. One of them was a teenager and still lived with him. He worked as a general maintenance worker at a hospital. He had been working there since 2008, and he was well respected. Everyone at the hospital loved him and had nothing but good things to say about him. Because he worked as a maintenance worker at this hospital, he had an access key that would allow him to get into every single door, every single floor, every single area of the hospital, basically. Keep that in mind. So police think that it was him that committed these crimes in the 80s. So December 3rd, 2020, they go to his house, they arrest him on suspicion of these murders. They take his DNA and it is an exact match, so he is officially charged. David is acting clueless. He says he doesn't know who Caroline and Wendy are. He doesn't even know the town it happened in. He doesn't know anything. He's denying it all. But he also doesn't know that meanwhile, the questioning is going on. There are policemen back at his house searching his home, ripping it apart. And what they found inside of his home is unbelievable. So they did find evidence connecting him to both Wendy and Caroline. They found old pictures of his shoe that matched the shoe print that they found at the crime scene. They found receipts showing that he often went to the film store that Wendy worked at, as well as receipts that showed he was often at the restaurant where Caroline worked at. And they found pictures of him in the 80s, and in the background was the field where Caroline's body was found in. So a lot of things confirming that everything he was denying was a lie. Other things that they found were diaries. David would write down every single thing that he did every single day for his entire life. And they also found a lot of pictures, photo albums, SD cards, hard drives, everything. These SD cards, hard drives, and everything that contained either photos or videos were very well hidden. Like, for example, he would tape it underneath his desk, or he would carve out little pieces in the wall, put them in there, and then hide them. You could tell he was trying to hide them. In those videos, it was revealed that David Fuller almost every single day had this routine where he would sneak into the morgue after hours. He would take his toolbox with him. In case someone walked in, he could make up an excuse that he was working on something in there. But what he was really doing is he was using and dead bodies and would film himself doing these horrible things to these bodies. So this guy that people thought was just a regular 65-year-old maintenance man was really sneaking into the morgue and doing the most horrific, disgusting, unspeakable things. It has been confirmed that he did this over 100 times to bodies aged between 9 and 100, but his key card was used to go into the morgue thousands of times, so we will never really know exactly how many times he committed these heinous crimes. In his diary, he would write down specific details about everything that he would do to the victims, as well as their names, their ages, and specific actions that he did. And sometimes the victims' names would be in there multiple days in a row, and then they would just disappear, which means their bodies were probably released to their families so that they could have proper funerals. And just knowing that David did disgusting things to the victims, and then those bodies were later taken back to their families to be put to rest is just unbelievable. At the trial, he did plead guilty, and he was charged with the 2 murders as well as 51 offenses. At 68 years old, he was sentenced, and at his sentencing, the judge said, "You will live the rest of your mortal life in prison." Oh my God, I was reading the details. I can't include too many pictures on this one because it's just so disturbing. And because it was the 80s, there was not CCTV footage of the morgue, but they didn't really need that because David recorded himself doing all these disgusting things. But yeah, crazy. Look up his name. It's so disturbing, and let me know what you think.